Today, we're going to be talking about expert techniques for selling to the C-suite. We're going to break this down in a couple different buckets, but I'm really excited to introduce you to our two guests. Our first one is Scott Leese, CEO and founder at Scott Leese Consulting. I think the other big thing too is, you've been a VP of sales, not to age you at this point, but 6 times.
Yes.
Six times. So selling to the C-suite, I think you have a very interesting perspective in that, one, you have done the selling, you've managed the salespeople, you've been an executive yourself, and then you coach and work with a lot of executives and sales teams. So I'm really excited to get your perspective.
Buyer, I guess.
He's a buyer too. Well. He likes to buy stuff. So
not anymore. Don't try to sell me.
We'll drop his phone number into the chat if you want to cold call him later. Jonathan Lister, COO at Vidyard, previous leader at LinkedIn, Google, AOL. I don't know. What was your guys' AOL names? Do you guys remember?
I don't remember mine.
I was the same, J Lister CA.
So plain.
A while now.
Yeah.
Well,
I used it for work. I worked there. So
yeah. Okay. So super excited to get your perspective too, because you've been a multiple time leader, you've been in the sales seat, you're a current COO. So we're going to get your perspective on some cool things too. And if you're just seeing myself for the first time, I'm Jason Bay. I run a company called Outbound Squad. We do sales training for companies like Zoom, Shopify, Gong, all that kind of stuff. So super excited to dig in. Before we get to it, let us know in the chat, what are you most excited to learn from these two when it comes to selling to the C-suite? Let us know. I'm going to give a quick shout out to our sponsors and partners and give you guys some good stuff to grab in the chat. And then we're going to dig into the topic. So Zoom Info, I think one of the coolest things about Zoom Info is that there's so much more than data that they use. And if you haven't checked out their Copilot, it's AI in a place where you can actually use it. You can be spoon-fed accounts to reach out to, messaging, all of that kind of stuff. So go make sure to check out Zoom Info. We got Vidyard. I think one of the cool things about Vidyard is I've always loved adding a visual element to the outreach that I do. So if you have problems, especially that you can show people on a website or something that you can find online, it's a really great way to illustrate that problem. In the chat, they have an issue diagnosis checklist for SDR teams. So if you're a sales leader and you're thinking how the hell do I figure out what my team is doing wrong and then how to fix it? They have a checklist that's going to help you with that. And then last but not least, Orem, one of my favorite solutions. I think one of the hardest things about cold calling right now is, I don't know about you two, I don't even pick up the phone very often. And a big thing that Orem helps with is, one, prioritizing numbers that are more likely to pick up, and then just allowing you to have way more conversations. They have a campaign going called Hello Sales, Hello World, and they would love for you to submit a story. So we'll drop that link into the chat as well. Okay, without further ado, you guys ready to dig in?
Let's do it.
Yep.
Okay, so I was telling both of you when we were kind of prepping through content, I was like, when I think of selling to the C-suite, the first thing I think of is most reps are probably not interacting directly with the C-suite very early in the conversation. This typically will happen, if it happens, later in the conversation. And for the audience, what I would love for you to drop into the chat, what percentage of the time when you're working deals do you actually get on a call with someone in the C-suite or maybe a senior vice president? Let us know the percentage in the chat. I'm really curious. Mary says 2%. 0%, 10%, 1 to 3%. Michael, are guys just crushing it 90%? 80%? So what we're going to talk about today is we're going to break this topic down into a couple parts because it's I wish it were just as easy as I just hop on a call with COOs and CEOs and CROs or whatever I sell and I can just start selling to them. It doesn't always happen like that for most of us. So what we're going to talk about is one, how to get in the head of a senior executive. So how to know a little bit more about what they care about. Two, we're going to talk about working up to the deal. So how to work with your champion, how to multi-thread. And the third part that we're going to talk about is when you get introduced to what I like to refer to as the final boss, how do we run that meeting? So in terms of what makes this so hard, I'll kick the first question your way, Scott. I think the reason why C-suite involvement is so important is that, the statistics show you from Gong, your win rates will almost double when they look at deals where senior vice presidents or C-suite are involved and when they are not. So I think there's a very obvious reason to why we want to get them involved. But with all the companies that you work with and through your experience, what do you feel like reps really miss in terms of like not making this happen more in their deals? Why are there reps here that only do it at 1 to 3% of the time?
Well, obviously, it depends on who they're selling to and what they're selling. So some of those people who commented, maybe they're not selling solutions to the C-suite at all. That's not their business. That would be interesting to think about. I think one of the issues is sales reps get happy ears all the time, and they get real excited because whoever it is that they're talking to, maybe it's a operations manager or a sales manager or whoever, they have so much enthusiasm about it, right? And that feels good. I mean, if we're being honest with ourselves, sales is a brutal profession where you're getting told no politely or very impolitely all day long, over and over and over. And so you kind of have to live for these moments where something good happens and there's positive momentum. And sometimes that like moment where you get this lift, it takes you too far. Yeah. And you forget the discipline of like, okay, this deal is not done. There's other people involved here. And I have to talk to them. I have to find ways to pull them in and stuff like that. And you just think, wow, Jason is so excited. Jason's going to go back to his team and he's going to close this deal for us. Right. And I don't know what to label it as other than, happy ears. So that is a big part of it is we put too much faith in our champion or whoever it is that we're talking to and their ability to communicate what problem we're trying to solve and the value of it. We put too much faith in them and let them go have these conversations on their own without us in the, conference room or whatever. And then we sit around and we're surprised when the feedback comes in that, they think it's cool, but we're not going to move forward. Yeah. Right. So you really have to be disciplined to not get these happy ears and not just think, oh, Jason's got this. Like we're in good shape.
Can I say like a really easy way to do that? I totally agree. A really easy way to do that, like critique every call, like critique yourself. Like when you get off a call, critique that call. Like what was good about this? What was bad about it? Like you have to take a hard kind of look at how you do sales calls and how you're selling. And the easy way to do it is just critique what you've done. Like what could go wrong is a great question to ask. Yeah. Like when reps are in a sales cycle, plot out, don't plot out what could go right, or you could do that, but plot out what can go wrong and take a hard look at like, what are the things that would kill this deal? If you know that in advance, you're going to be way better off when those things, inevitably something like that will come up and you're going to have an answer for it.
And you do know those things in advance at this point in time because you've lost deals before and you've got this feedback. So you should have a list of like, okay, here's all the things that have been killing me and killing my deals. And here's all the, negative feedback that comes back when I allow this champion or this person who was super excited to go do this work with the C-suite without me. Right.
Yeah. I love all this. The thing that I would kind of double click on is you need to really look at your sales pipeline through shit-colored goggles, right? You need to look at it through a lens of paranoia. And the question isn't, as a sales leader, this is a big takeaway. The question isn't, why will this deal close? It's why won't it close?
100%.
Yeah. Right. You need to look at it like and de-risk is kind of the philosophy behind this. So let's get into the steps. So Jonathan, I want to talk about, I think it's really important to understand what is in the head of a senior executive and why they would even want to participate and know what's going on in a deal to begin with, because before we can get them involved in the deal, we need to figure out what's important to them. So what I would love to know from you at Vidyard and in previous positions that you've been in, how do you decide how to prioritize your time? Like where do you decide to spend your time and when do you decide that, like we're being sold something from another company, I should probably participate in this deal. I should maybe hop on a call. I should be talking about this in my one-on-one with whoever. What prompts that for you? How do you think about how you prioritize your time?
Yeah, I mean, look, I run sales marketing. I prioritize my time with customers. Like my job is to grow our business. So, and you can tell that from my title. Like it's not super complicated. How I prioritize my time based on sort of like all kinds of like customer interaction. But what gets me into a sales call, whether it's with one of my reps or whether it's with a vendor who calls, the single greatest thing I think anybody can do to engage a C-suite or engage someone senior is to have an internal referral. Like I will not turn down a call from a vendor who says, I was talking to 3 people on your team, and they all told me like this problem has been acute for a little while. You're trying to solve it in this way, and collectively we agree that my solution may help you to do that. An internal referral is the single best way to get my attention. So, and even better if someone inside my company tells me that this vendor has been talking to them and brings it to me. So that internal referral is like the best way to do it. So when you talk about multi-threading, multi-thread into your target organizations, but with a view to having champions like sponsor you up. That should always be the goal. Like sponsor you to the next level, sponsor you to the decision maker, sponsor you to the person who ultimately is going to influence the deal the most.
Even better when it's both, right? Like,
sure.
Imagine this person on your team comes to you and says, "Hey, I talked to these people. They have this solution. It solves this problem. It seems like really, really cool, really important." And then somebody from outside comes and says, "By the way, these 4 people on your team," and you're like, "Wow, I just had this conversation with so and so 2 days ago, and now I'm hearing it again that 4 other people." Like that is like
powerful.
Probably the sweet spot.
So I want to get like super specific here for the reps that are on the call. And there's like a lot of nuance that happens on the buyer side that as a sales rep, you never see. So I want to ask some of those questions, but before we get to that, we have a Q&A section here in Zoom. So if there's specific questions that you guys have that you want answers to, make sure to drop them in there so that we can make this a little more interactive. So I'm curious, Jonathan, let's say someone on your team hops on a call with Scott and it's about sales training or consulting or whatever it is, right? Some RevOps stuff. And it's really interesting to them. How do they socialize that to you? Is this a Slack message that says, "Hey, I hopped on a call with this guy, Scott. He seems pretty badass." And then you talk about it in your next, like, how does that happen? Because the specifics around this, I think, are really important for the reps to understand how things get socialized.
I think it's a great question. And the answer is, of course, like it depends on the context. I work for a company that's 150 people. So it's a pretty flat organization. A lot of things happen over Slack. But you have to know your target organization. If I'm selling into, Microsoft or, IBM, there's going to be a different format. So you've got to know like how your target gathers information, like how they make these kinds of decisions. In my case, it's over Slack. I'll ask a bunch of questions if a rep comes to me and says,
"Okay, yes, that's what I want." So someone says, "Hey, this Scott guy's pretty cool." What do you respond? Like, what do you need to see in order to even put?
I'll put this in a way that I think is probably common to lots of folks. My answer is going to be something along the lines of like, is this helping with one of our priorities?
Yeah.
Like I have 3 to 5 priorities. Like every C-suite, every VP, you're going to have 3 to 5 priorities that matter. And how well you can align your solution to one of those 3 to 5, get it above the line is really important. And so I'll ask my rep, like, great, like we have this priority. Is this which of the priorities is this mapping to? And like, hopefully the rep has done, my rep has done their homework and they know that if they can answer that question, I'm going to have a call with Scott.
Yeah. So Scott, you mentioned this before when we were prepping too. You said something along the lines of, I'm seeing a lot of patterns with reps right now, not aligning to something that is already important to the buyer, an existing priority. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yeah, I think what happens quite a bit is we're taught as salespeople to discover pain, right? And talk about the value of that and find ROI and quantify pain and all this kind of thing. And so let's say you do a really good job of that. And, I'm like, Jonathan and I just discovered $1 million problem going on in his business. And we oftentimes as salespeople don't take the time to understand somebody's business well enough to know that this $1 million problem barely freaking registers as important or critical for them. We just think to ourselves, because most of us don't run $100 million, multi-million-dollar companies or don't come from money. We hear $1 million problem and we're like, oh shit.
Yeah, that's a lot of money.
A lot of money. Like, if I had $1 million problem, I'd drop everything and do it right now. And that's what the salesperson hears and sometimes thinks that the prospect is doing, and that's their process as well. But in reality, if I identify $1 million problem, with Jonathan, he's probably over here going, well, I have 50 $10 million problems that I'm trying to deal with right now. So cool, you found $1 million problem for me, but it's at the bottom of my priority list.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean that I don't want to fix it. It just means I got a lot of other stuff coming in front of it, right? So you should, first of all, know a lot of this information up front. You should know what size problems these companies are dealing with. And you have to be able to ask questions like, okay, Jonathan, we discovered this $1 million problem. Does this thing even register with you? Is it important at all?
Yeah.
Right? Are all your other problems
right
worth
there,
100
Scott?
million?
I'll pause you real quick.
Yeah.
So I love this. Like if we were to get pretty tactical with like, let's say I'm not engaged with Jonathan yet in the deal, and I'm engaged with you, one of his VPs, let's say, or maybe a head of something. Can you tell us, how do you finesse that conversation around getting them to even talk about what Jonathan's priorities might be? And I'm asking this is coming from a person that teaches sales training, that I know even in the deals that I work, sometimes people seem hesitant to share the priorities of their boss, or they might not know also.
Yeah.
So how do you extract that information?
Can I
go ahead?
Yeah, go ahead.
Like I think so one sort of double-edged sword, maybe two sides to this. Like one is, reps have to have conviction and belief. Like you've got to come in with a point of view, right? If you want to be successful selling to anybody, but selling to the C-suite. So you got to have conviction and then test that conviction, right? You want to have a belief. Like I believe this is what's happening in the industry. I believe there are these problems in the industry, and everything I've read and said and all the homework I've done suggests you have this problem. And it's this size problem. It's $1 million problem. This is what your peer set is saying. Your peers have this $1 million problem. Do you have this problem, or am I on the right track? Like, validate this with me. I find those kinds of questions where if you've done your homework and you know what the challenges are in the industry and you know what the peer set is doing, use those to build your conviction and belief. And that is how you can kind of unlock that next set of questions. And really all you're doing is like testing that with the person across the table from you, whether the VP or director, whatever. You test that first, and then as you validate, then you can put all the information together and grow that deal and grow the size of the deal. And maybe one more thing on this, in a related way, like executives, the thing that I think a lot of reps don't understand in the beginning is they want to talk about a large deal. Like they want to talk about a deal that is the right size for their portfolio, right? If I deal with $10 million problems all day long, I want you to bring me a problem that's a $10 million problem. I'm not interested, in $1 million problem, but I am interested in that $10 million. Like a lot of reps get nervous because they're like, oh, that's a lot of money.
Big number, they get
it's a
scared.
big number. I'm like, no. They get paid to solve big problems, big number of problems all day long. You have to bring them. So as long as it's viable, bring them that size problem.
I'd also like to point out that, in my opinion, it's a mistake to overlook the size of problems that first contact is dealing with that you're talking to. Mm-hmm. Like you said, how do I convince this, champion frontline manager type person that this problem is big enough for the C-suite person, whatever. I actually don't jump to that straight away. Mm-hmm. I actually have that conversation with the first person that I'm talking to, that soon to be champion. Yeah. And it's the same kind of thing. Like, what do you deal with all day long? Do they deal with $1 million problems or $5 million problems or $10 million problems? I'm very keen on making sure that they know that this helps them.
The personal way.
This makes their job easier. This will make them look like a hero first. I have to get them, I think, to believe in that. And they have that conviction that Jonathan was talking about. So now I have conviction and they have conviction. And now we're on the same team, hopefully. Yeah. And when we go talk to the C-suite person, it's a different type of conversation. They're more invested in it.
Yeah, yes, and don't stop there. Yeah. So what happens sometimes is you hit that point, or a rep hits that point where they've got commitment
and then
or
you get
alignment,
those happy years,
and they're like, "Great, I got the $1 million deal. I'm done. Check." When in fact there was much more behind it if they had just done that with 3 other stakeholders and moved up the value chain.
Okay, so let's get into the second portion of this, like the workup. And I want to spend some time talking about champion building. So Berlin, I think, is how this person pronounces it. Any tips on building a strong champion? I want to kind of get into this, and there are some other things. So like, let's say that I'm working a deal. Scott is the champion. I think one of the questions that everyone has and a natural fear of multi-threading is, do I just go direct to Jonathan? Is that going to piss Scott off if I do that? If I go direct to Jonathan and he doesn't know, do I let Scott know that? Like, let's talk about that real quick. And let's get your perspective. Like if a rep was working a deal, if I was working a deal with Scott and you didn't know that it was happening, what was going on, and then I sent you an email out of the blue and let you know about the conversation, what happens internally?
Well, first I'd say, like, you know, my job, my rep's job, our job is to create as much value as we can for our customers, right? And the way to create that value is what we're describing, is by stakeholder management, is by multi-threading, is by understanding as much as I can about the company, is by getting as senior as I can, right? So, and I will explain that, and I would encourage all sellers, you explain that to your customers. My job is to help you see as much value, create as much value, and that's why I'm doing what I'm doing. And so that's sort of the thesis behind, like, why to multi-thread. In terms of actual multi-threading, like the who to talk to, I have my view, like, I love selling. Selling is like super fun, and every interaction can be fun. But I don't treat these interactions as transactional. And I would encourage you and sellers, don't treat them as transactional. I think Scott raised a great point. Take the approach that you're trying to help somebody, right? You're trying to help them with their career. You're trying to help them get ahead. By the way, if your solution isn't right for them, great. Figure that out as fast as you can and get out and move on. Like, the best thing you can do. The opportunity cost of sticking around too long in a sales cycle is how reps get riffed. Right. How reps get riffed, right? Is hanging around too long in a deal cycle. So if you can get out as fast as you can. But take the view that you're trying to help everybody in that company do their job best, achieve their goals. I mean, the best solution, and I've seen this happen many times in my career, and I'm super proud of it, is when, you help somebody get promoted inside one of your target companies because, your solution helped them. They were the sponsor. They bought the solution.
Yeah.
So, like, I would encourage people not to take a transactional approach. Like, I'm not going to you to talk to you, like, to see what I can get out of you. This is about like a real kind of quid pro quo and growing the relationship.
But what would you do if I sent you an email and said I talked to Scott on your team about so-and-so problem and I wanted to hop on a meeting with you and I didn't tell Scott I was going to do that? What happens? I
mean, I would go check with Scott. I'd go check with my internal folks. Like, if like what this person said was true and there was value, that's fine by me.
Yeah.
I mean, I think you want this to be natural. Like, you don't want to go down, nothing should feel like a real interruption, right? It should all feel like a creative along the way. So I've talked to Scott, I learned something from him. I talked to somebody else inside the company. I've learned something from them. I now think it's time to go to you because I've learned these things about your organization. I've learned the size of the deal is a priority to you. I've learned this priority is really important. There's a timeline on it. And now I think I can help.
Yeah.
So I think the context matters a lot.
I think the time matters too. Like, did that message come through 5 minutes after you just talked to me? Or was it 5 days or 5 weeks? Like, if the champion that you're talking to has gone completely dark and you can't get a hold of them.
But let's say it's an active deal, though. The reason why I'm
what is active? Yeah. People's definition of an active deal.
But the reason why I'm focusing on this so much, though, is this: anytime I teach multi-threading, let us know in the chat if this resonates. This is the number one fear people have in, like, engaging C-suite, is they're worried about going over their champion's head when someone is not proactively wanting to involve their boss.
They're worried about what the C-suite person is going to think and feel, or they're worried about
that their champion is going to say, screw this Jason guy, Jonathan. Like, he was a jerk. Like, you can make up all kinds of stuff about that. That is the number one fear that people have with multi-threading.
If the pain and the problem is real enough, then the C-suite person is not going to care as much about the feelings involved.
Yeah.
They're going to focus more on solving the problem.
Yeah. So,
go ahead. I really think it's important to be candid with all your stakeholders. Like, this is my approach. This is what's worked in the past. This is the approach.
That's my point.
If your champion says you can absolutely not go to the CEO, I refuse. I will not. Like, that's great. Have that conversation. But use it as often as you can, and then at some point decide, like, is it still the right thing to do? Like, it's like, what's the downside? At some point, the downside is, like, the deal's not going anywhere. To the point, like, where are we in the sales cycle? The deal's not happening.
And you learn that early, which is nice too.
Yeah.
But why are we using champion in the singular? Why does everybody think we just have to have one champion? You should be trying to create multiple champions.
Yeah.
Shouldn't you?
But I think the same thing applies, though, is if I reach out to one of your peers and say I was talking to Scott and I don't tell you that, there's a way to do this in a way that really my point is, there's a way that I've seen that really turns people off if you do it the wrong way.
I'm telling you from somebody who sat in the C-suite and somebody who's a buyer, I don't particularly care about my internal champion's feelings and emotions.
Yeah.
I care about solving this particular problem.
Yeah.
So if Jason comes to me and he's like, this guy was mean, he, bypassed me and skipped me and went straight to you, I'm going to be like, I don't really care, actually. Let's focus on what is this problem.
But let me ask you this.
As long as the value is correct,
that's what I'm saying. As long as it's
But
real.
let me ask
and
you
I
this.
actually might get mad at that person for not surfacing it to me on their own sooner. I might think to myself, how come this guy didn't, how come he didn't bring this to me sooner?
Let me ask you this, though. Let's say that you two are VPs and you have 3 direct reports, 3 directors, and none of them like me. You're going to go with that solution?
I'm not sure I follow.
Well, I want to know why they don't. I mean, I don't.
What if they just didn't like this going through the sales process with me? But I surface all of this value to you and I send you a great email that's got like, here's the problem, but they don't like their choice out of the 3 people they looked at is I'm not on that list. I'm not the top of that list. Are you going to go with that solution?
Well, it just comes back to like, why would those 3 reps have not chosen your solution? Like, I assume they all know I assume they know what they're doing. I assume they know their business.
You're saying just because your approach was less tactful or whatever than somebody else.
That's my point. I do think this is good to spend time on because you do have to be tactful. Like one of the things that I teach that and I do is like if I'm working with you and you're one of my champions, if I want Jonathan involved in the deal, I'm gonna tell a client story about why that actually helps you get a better outcome. So with sales training, for example, the thing that I talk about with getting a VP of sales involved is like, hey, if we don't know, Scott and how this is going to align with like where the organization is going in the next 6 or 12 months, like aligning to that helps get everyone on the same page. If we don't get enablement involved in the conversation, we're not thinking about how the content's going to get reinforced. And usually what I'll tell is a client story, hey, when we worked with Rippling, here's how that kind of went down and the players that got involved that helped us get XYZ outcome. Can I give you some suggestions on who I think would be good to loop in? Like coming at it more consultative and having a reason why I want to involve someone more senior or other people. That's the point that I'm making is I think there needs to be a reason why, and you need to be tactful about that. What I don't want people to get the impression of is that you just send emails to the C-suite telling them about the conversations and they're just going to be like, yeah, let's meet. A lot of people do that and it really turns off the people they're working with. Feel free to disagree with me. That's just what I see firsthand.
I'm not one of those people.
Yeah.
I think I'm not one of those.
I'm not one of those sales guys too.
No, I'm not one of those people. I'm not one of those people who is impacted by that. If you bring me 2 solutions or 2 products and they're of absolutely equal value and feature sets and whatnot, and one person's approach I didn't like Jason's approach, and the other person's approach we liked, then I'll go with the person that we liked. But very rarely are 2 solutions or products exactly level.
Yeah.
Right. And so if there was a tact and approach that was suboptimal, but their product was better and they could actually fix my business better, I can remove my emotions from this and I'll work with the better product and the better solution.
So I do think
that doesn't mean that I'm right. I'm just telling you that's one. I exist out there. There are other people like me.
Well, Scott's raising a good point. Like first, I agree with what you said. Like, the process is as you described. The process should be to tell people in advance what you're going to do, why you're doing it. Like to your point, like this is what I've done with competitors. This is how the process works. You do all that up front. Like for sure, like all those things make sense. But just to be clear, the reality is, and this is the reason I brought up conviction, is people buy on feeling. Like you can have these 2 identical sort of solutions, and at the end of the day, the buyer will buy the one they feel the best about. That's empirical. So if you're a seller, you have to build that belief and that conviction, and that's what multi-threading is really about. All along the way, you want to build the conviction, build your strong point of view, have confidence in what you're doing. Spend the time building that conviction so that when you're in front of the C-suite, you've got that conviction. Ideally, your champions, plural, have that and can convey that conviction.
Plural.
Yeah. So let's get to the third part. So we've talked about getting inside the head of the senior executive, understanding how they prioritize their time. We've talked about early stage deals, so like the workup and the champions and multi-threading and that sort of stuff. Let's talk about, okay, when you do get a chance to that CTO or CISO or whoever is like, okay, cool, we're going to join a call. What I want to talk about first, and I'll kick this question your way, Scott. How do you think about the preparation for that call? And not only just the preparation the rep does by themselves, but the preparation they might do with the champion. What should I think about coming into that call when I'm getting introduced to someone that is very senior, that's our economic buyer for the first time?
Well, at the risk of stating the obvious, you better be prepared.
Yeah, but prepared with what? Though?
I know, but I just want to start with hammering home that
people
point.
People do wing it.
A lot of people wing it, especially if you've got 7 meetings in a row, all back to back to back. It's like, okay, somebody's getting shortchanged here. It's probably not the right way to do it. So don't wing it. You should definitely be prepared. You should know what this C-suite person's priorities are, what they're focused on, what they're worrying about, what they're stressed about, what's going to get them promoted, what's going to get them fired, all this kind of thing. You should know who you're up against, if anybody. Status quo could be what you're up against, or it could be alternative.
What are the options?
What are the options? It's either do nothing, do something with somebody else, or do something with us. Right. So you should know those things. You should know some of these stories that you're talking about. You should know all the things that derailed all the other deals that you didn't close up until that point, and prepare yourself. Okay, I'm going to get this objection. I'm going to run into this. I'm going to have to mention this thing. I didn't do this last time, so I need to do it that time. Right? It's like looking at game tape, game film.
Yeah,
Jonathan
both have talked about that.
Talked before about, I can't remember the phrase you used, but it was like, go back and listen to your calls and evaluate your performance, be self-aware. These are the things I did well. These are the things I could have done better. Right? So you should go back and review actually all the times that you shanked and say, okay, I'm not going to make those mistakes again. What do I need to do in order to avoid that? Right? That's like 3 things right there.
Yeah. I had a couple. Like, one is know what kind of person they are. Like, what are they like? Are they someone who yells a lot? Are they someone who's like even keeled?
Well, this is something just simply asking your champion, right?
Are
they a straight to business type of person?
Like what can I expect? So that's pretty reasonable.
You can learn that stuff elsewhere though too, right? Like, do they post content online? You can tell a lot about somebody.
That's what you say. In part of the research
on video or whatever.
Right. These days, everyone's footprint is social, so you can figure a ton about them, their beliefs, what they like. I mean, I was doing a call with a C-suite a little while ago, and I looked at her profile, and it turns out she'd posted, like 2 weeks ago on exactly the topic. Like in my case, exactly, but it was an interaction with an avatar. And not only did she post, but in that she had this great manifestation of how I thought my product could help her. It was amazing, right? That was just from a 30-second looking at what she was posting about and what she cared about. The other thing, I'm a big fan of like really simple frameworks too, because it can get pretty complicated pretty quickly. Like, before you go into a meeting or you're assessing a meeting, I would ask like really, really simply, like, what would I do if I were them? I find that's one of the most powerful questions.
You could ask ChatGPT that also.
What would I do if I was in their shoes? I know everything they know about my organization. I know a fair bit about them. Like, what would I do if I were them?
Yeah.
Right. So
I think also just asking your champion, like running through the agenda, and like if you have slides or you're going to do a certain, like just run it by them. Hey, what's going to get shot down by so-and-so here? What are they not going to like? What are they skeptical of coming in? That's my favorite question, is like, what are they going to be skeptical of?
And you probably, if you're being honest, know those things. If you're talking about a slide deck, 5 slides, 10 slides, whatever, you probably know like, where's the weak point? Yeah. Where's the chink in the armor in this pitch, in this deck?
Yeah.
Right. If you've done it enough, you should know. And then you have to figure out, okay, how do I strengthen this area? What do I need to be prepared for? This is coming. How am I going to overcome it?
Yep. So let's talk about the actual call. I have a lot of opinions on like how to run that call, and there's certainly context that's needed. But I find when I get introduced to a CRO or an SVP at a large company, it's usually straight to business. And the number one thing that they want to hear about is, 1, do you understand the problem that we have? And 2, I want to hear a proof point. Who have you done this for? You're saying that you can do all of these things, but who have you that I respect and look at as an industry leading peer? Like, who have you done this for? That's usually how I'll spend the first 5 or 6 minutes. Set the agenda, let them know that like, hey, this is typically what I'm talking about on these calls. Does it sound good for you for the first 5 minutes? I'll kick this first question your way. when you're thinking about that first call, and maybe speak through the lens of when you hop on these sales calls and you're being sold to also, like, what are you expecting to go down in that first call? How should it be structured?
I mean, I think first calls can all be different depending on where we are in the sales cycle. I have a version of what you said, though, that I think is, again, like this really simple framework. I think the way to manage any kind of exec call, but like a sales call, there's two questions you should address like in the first minute is like, why does this matter? And how's it going? It's that simple, right? This thing I have for you, or we're talking about, like, why does it matter to you? This goes to the $1 million question. Is this a $1 million problem? A $10 million? Why does this matter? Right. Yeah. And then how's it going? We've tested this. We're in beta with your, this team, and this is what we found so far. It's been working out pretty well here. Then, if you cover those two things in the first minute, like generally how you will hold the conversation for the next 30 minutes.
And again, that's something you need to validate with your champion. It's like you should have that problem. It should be in their language. Like you should know any priorities that it might align to.
And by the way, you can validate that. You can say like, this is the problem. This is how it's going. Like, do you agree? Like, are you seeing the same things I'm seeing? And this comes to conviction and belief. Like you want, it's your product. You've got to, have belief in your own product and your own solution. But I find that that's the single best way to kind of start the conversation, hold the attention, and then you can do like, I think, really critical validation as you're going on.
I can tell you what I don't want. What I don't want is to sit through an entire pitch that somebody else on my team already listened to.
Yeah.
I'm not there to hear the whole spiel from A to Z, right? I'm there because there's very specific things at this point that I want to get out of it. And I maybe haven't communicated those to you. So what I want is for you to say to me, what do you want to get out of this?
Yeah.
I could talk your ear off about this stuff for 5 hours all day. I can show you 100 different things that matter. But what are the things that you specifically want to get out of this? If you get off this call in 15 minutes or 30 minutes, how do I ensure that it's a beautiful use of your time?
Yeah.
Whether you tell me yes, no, maybe so, don't care. What I want is to get that specific information, right?
Do you state, oftentimes I will state explicitly that my objective for the call is that you get enough information today that you either feel comfortable sponsoring this project or you don't feel comfortable. Yeah. Like that's my objective. That's what I want to figure out.
I mean, the more clear about objectives you can be, the better. And they'll tell you yes, no, or like, well, let's go in a different direction. But like, that is the way to start the call and manage to those objectives and manage to that outcome. But like senior executives aren't any different from anybody else. Like they like to be guided if it's the right kind of guiding. Like if it's guiding to the problem they know is a big problem, like they'll generally be really open to being guided. They just don't want to be steered in the wrong direction.
That point does go back to the other point we were talking about in terms of understanding who the person is you're talking to, because there's certainly some people who are more direct, / aggressive, assertive, or whatever.
Sure.
Like, I don't want to have 10 minutes of chit chat about whatever the hell.
I'm not that
I want you to get to the point. But there's a lot of people that if you come at it real direct like that,
they don't like it.
They don't like it.
One of my CRO clients is like that. Like we just bullshitted for 10 minutes straight about pasta.
You got to know that though. You have to know that and not misfire on that. Not take the wrong approach with somebody.
Well, I think you both have a great point too, in that they're human and interact with them like a human. Just don't waste their freaking time, right?
Yes.
We got a couple minutes left, you two. There's a couple questions I think that are really good. Gabby has a question. After putting an internal referral, let's say that I engage with that person in the C-suite, and they say, you know what, just stick with so-and-so that you're already talking to. Like that's their job. So you get denied, and they punt you down or refer you down, let's say, and you don't get to interact with them. What's the next move as a sales rep?
Yeah, I think one is you probably just want to validate like what just happened, like the size of your solution, the impact of your solution. Like they said that for a reason, so clearly it didn't resonate. Did it not resonate because I got the priorities wrong and it wasn't a priority, or did I misfire in my presentation and didn't deliver it right? So one is, I think you want to do like an assessment. There may be cases where that's great, like it's really good news. Like, and I would start to ask a bunch of questions at that point, like, do you want me to work with this person because you're supportive, and you believe that this is the right solution, and by working with this team, we'll get to the right outcome. So I think you want to validate sort of what they like. Are they still a sponsor? Are they still interested, or are they
What if this is just via
disengaging?
email and they're just like, nah, talk to so-and-so?
Then I think you've got to do a bit of a reset.
Yeah.
Then I think you haven't done, you got something wrong in the process in all likelihood, and you should do that critical assessment and figure out like what went wrong and how do I backtrack? How do I reset? And is it worth resetting?
Well, I think the other thing too is just like you have a thread of communication open with that person now. Let me go back to Scott, talk about the problem and make sure it's like the problem that is the biggest priority for this. And then you can go back to them. Like they're threaded in at that point. Like you've had communication.
Totally. And I think that, a good scenario in that is you want to, be able to come back to them in 30 days or 60 days and kind of revalidate. And I think, again, you need to ask them some questions about why they want you to work with this, whoever they told you to go work with, but you also want to get the, ability to come back to them in a certain amount of time to revalidate or bring it back to them. I think that's okay too. Like, you should ask those questions.
I think it's important at that point in time to understand that person they sent you to in the moment now becomes the most important person.
Yep, 100%.
And I think that's a mistake that people make is they view that as like, oh gosh, they sent me to this underling person. And they spend all their time thinking, how do I get to this other person, this C-suite kind of person? I think that's a mistake.
Yeah.
I think if I get that signal, I'm thinking to myself, Jonathan is now priority number one for me.
Yeah.
I need to pour all of my effort and energy into him and making sure that he gets this.
That personal buy-in.
Before I worry again about this C-suite or whatever. Right?
Awesome. We're up on time, fellas. This was great. I feel like these 3 topics could have been 3 separate webinars. But I think one of the personal takeaways for me was like just a reminder that you have to find the personal win for the people that you're interacting with, especially the champions, because it's a lot of work to internally socialize and like sell your boss who they already have a hard time getting time with. Before we take off, I want to thank Zoom Info, Vidyard, and Orem for making today possible. I want to thank you too for spending time with us in the audience. Thanks for all of the interaction, all of that good stuff. Before you take off, we dropped some goodies into the chat for you. So make sure to check out all the free resources from Zoom Info, Vidyard, and Orem. And that's all we got for you. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
See ya.